Look at this adorable baby. I got a new cat. She's the sweetest. So she'll be in and out. If you see her in the video, enjoy it. Hi friends! If you haven't seen any of my videos before, my name is JT, and I'm doing a series about trans people. This is for a capstone for my Women's and Gender Studies class, and if you want to see more about the purpose of my topic, you can just check the description below. I'll have a little blurb. Today I want to talk about the experience of being trans in 2025 in America, the current things that are going on within the community, outside of the community, against the community. I'll be touching on a lot of political issues. I'll also be touching on a lot of positive experiences of being in the trans community as well. So if you're interested in that, make sure to stick around. Before we begin though, if you've seen my other videos, like 2 videos ago, I said like, oh, my hair is so frizzy, I don't know what to do. Well, it turns out I have wavy hair and I was caring for it wrong. So I figured it out, and now it's actually pretty cute. But anyway, let's get started with the video. I think the first thing that I want to touch on is just a very brief trans history, and then I'll explain why I'm talking about it, but don't expect it to be super in-depth, but this is just a broad overview of the highlights. So I think the first thing is that trans people are not a new phenomenon. There have been hundreds of different ways that gender nonconformity has been shown throughout history, and I want to touch on just 2 examples. The first one being two-spirit individuals. This is in reference to Native American individuals who are said to have embodied both feminine and masculine spirits. That's a term that was coined in the 1990s, but that's a term that accurately describes a lot of Native American people from multiple centuries ago. Another sort of historical example of gender nonconformity being documented for thousands of years is Hijras in India. So this is a culture that again goes back about 4,000 years, very, very long time, and these people were celebrated. They were believed to have special abilities, increased fertility. They kind of represented fertility, which is really important to ancient cultures. The overall thing with both Two-Spirit and Hijras is that they were looked up to because they didn't seem to be confined to their physical body, and that was something that a lot of people found very divine. Then jumping way forward in history, I want to talk about Lily Elbe. She was a woman who is known for having one of the first sex reassignment surgeries ever, at least officially. I'll throw a picture of her up on the screen, but I really want to point this out because it brings up some interesting points in history. First and foremost, when we started using photography to document history, at least in the mainstream, and also it marks a point where gender transition became medical to a degree. Obviously, our techniques and such have improved so much, but it is really cool to hear about these stories of people back in, this was in 1926, and to think about how different things were and how they had the courage to move forward with doing those procedures and kind of being the guinea pigs of that kind of stuff. But these were just a few examples, and the reason I bring them up is, again, just to show that gender conformity and people being transgender is something that is by far not new. It's been around for thousands of years, likely before that. Really, the scrutiny that we see today towards trans people or gender nonconforming people is really only happened within the past century. So 7,500 years. That's when like the modern transphobia began to manifest. But the pushback against trans people has also brought forth a lot of important historical trans figures as well, like Marsha P. Johnson, which I'm sure many people know who that is, but she is a Black trans woman who is known for being one of the main figures in the Stonewall Inn riots in the 1960s, which was a huge push for civil rights for LGBTQ people in that time. My main point is that trans people have always been viewed through a subjective lens. Objectively, there has always been gender nonconforming people, but subjectively, everyone's views on that is going to be different. It's when gender nonconformity is deemed to be unnatural or undesirable that we begin to see the scrutiny against trans people. We do happen to be at a point right now where being trans in the United States in 2025 is increasingly more dangerous, which is very concerning, but that's really the main focus of this video, and that's what I want to talk about. So what is going on right now? I think the biggest catalyst for a lot of this has been Donald Trump coming into office, signing a lot of executive orders, trying to implement a lot of new laws that are pretty much aimed at stripping the rights away from trans people, or being sneaky about it, trying to word things in a way to where it excludes trans people from certain things like voting, which we'll get into. The first example I have of this is the bathroom laws. Many of these bathroom laws have been implemented in certain states and pushed for in other states. Basically what these bills do is they make it to where the sex that you're assigned at birth, or the sex that your chromosomes say that you are, is the bathroom that you should use. So if you have XX chromosomes, you should be using the female bathroom. If you have XY chromosomes, you should be using the male bathroom. In case you're unfamiliar with the issues with these types of laws and bills, there's just so many flaws in the logic behind them. First, and most importantly, is intersex people. I feel like we kind of just forget that they exist a lot of the times. They really are a good example of why these binary systems, why these you're either male or female systems fall apart a lot of the times. Because while there can be a lot of argument about transgender people, it's really difficult to argue against intersex people because they were physically born like that with varying chromosomes. It could be XXY, XXX, XYY. There's just so many variations. If we're going based on chromosomes, which bathroom are these people supposed to use? Are we making an exception for these people? Should these people avoid using the bathroom in public? Like, these are things that I just don't think are thought about. I think there's even a lot of people that think that intersex people don't even exist, which is really concerning. I think the scariest part of these bathroom laws is, how do you enforce it? That's something that's so overlooked, but something that's very, very concerning when you actually look at the details. Because, again, as I've mentioned so many times in this series, you cannot always tell that a person is trans by the way that they look. This goes for a lot more trans people than people think. The reason that you don't notice trans people when they don't look trans is because they don't look trans. You pass many people who don't look trans but are trans. That's what I feel like a lot of people don't understand, is because you're not physically seeing it, that they don't exist, but trust me, they exist. But coming down to enforcement of these policies, are we going to have genital checks? How are we checking the ID? Because each state has different policies with IDs, and are we going to have to start carrying our birth certificates around so you can see that? But then also in some states you can change what's on your birth certificate. So I'm wondering if what these people really want to see is biology. Are we doing blood tests every time we go into the bathroom? Because even if I pull down my pants, I could have had a surgery that alters the appearance of my genitals. So how on earth would you enforce this? Even if you could, where would the line be? That doesn't make any sense. On top of this, if you enforce this where all biological males went into the men's bathroom, you'd be putting trans women in such incredible danger. And I understand that a lot of people don't care about the lives of trans people, but think about it from the perspective of a woman who completely passes as a woman, but is put into the male bathroom where there's people that could potentially target her and hurt her. We'll get into more of that later, but that's just concerning. And I don't think that anybody wants to see women, trans or not, be abused and hurt because they decided to go to the bathroom. On top of this, I also think that you'd be making cisgender women uncomfortable as well, asking trans men to go into the women's bathroom. I'm going to show a TikTok of a trans man who's kind of poking fun at the situation and pointing out the absurdity of asking him to go into a women's restroom looking like he does. It would, first of all, it would just cause chaos. And second of all, it would just make a lot of people feel uncomfortable. And it's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. How many times can I say it doesn't make sense? Another thing to combat the idea that you can always tell when a person is trans is there have been multiple cases recently where cisgender people, especially cisgender women, have been targeted and harassed in women's bathrooms because people have perceived them to be male. There is so much natural variation in the way that humans look. We see this with Iman Khalif as well, the boxer who had allegations of being trans. Allegations as if it's a crime for beating up a poor cisgender woman in a boxing fight. Meanwhile, Iman Khalif is born a woman, is a cisgender woman. It's called transvestigating. That's the term, right? Is trying to figure out whether or not a person is trans. It's not going to go well when we have people that look all over the spectrum. There are cisgender women who have more masculine features. Vice versa, there are a lot of men who have feminine features. The line can really get blurry between the two. And there was a story of a cisgender woman who was verbally harassed by a man when he saw her walk into the women's bathroom. She's 6'4", and he was just yelling slurs at her, talking about how trans people are ruining the country. Walmart, the company that she's working for, instead of standing up for her, they fired her for not reporting this incident or whatever, even though, according to a lot of sources, she did report. But it just goes to show these lines are a lot more blurry for a lot more Americans than people think it is. Next, I want to talk about HRT bans. This is really prevalent with the executive order that Trump signed into law on his first day of presidency. His priorities are really good. But basically, let me read the title of this and you can see just how inflammatory the language is. Protecting children from chemical and surgical mutilation. Whew. Trump signed this executive order basically stating that anyone 19 and under basically cannot have access to gender-affirming hormones or any sort of surgical procedure, which again we've talked about in previous videos, is extremely gatekept already. People aren't just getting it willy-nilly. One thing we've also already established, according to the Turban study, which I mentioned in the last video, having higher access to gender-affirming care at a younger age leads to less suicidal ideation, less suicidal attempts, less mental health issues. It doesn't seem like there's any research actually going into these decisions other than he personally thinks it's wrong and he has a loud crowd around him saying that this is okay to do, so he does it. But we're not listening to the medical professionals, which is really important when you're legislating medicine. Kind of a crazy idea. But the outcome of this is medical providers having the option of complying or not complying. Think about the impacts that could have for youth who have had access to gender-affirming hormones based on therapists' recommendations, based on doctor recommendations, based on parent consent, and even past the age of 18, having adult consent of your own, then having the hormones possibly stripped away from you. That'll have detrimental effects to not only your mental health, but also your physical health. Really concerning legislature being pushed by the Trump administration. What I think is most concerning about this is that this law specifically is now targeting people that are over the age of 18. And I know it's only 1 year, but again, we don't need to be normalizing that it's okay to legislate, especially people over the age of 18 who supposedly should have the freedom of living in America and doing what they want. It's concerning. The next biggest topic is gender markers on federal documentation for identification of people. This has been very controversial and it's affected a lot of trans people. I have seen so many anecdotes from trans people of their documentation randomly getting switched back to their sex assigned at birth. So trans women having male on their passport and whatnot. This is due to another executive order that was signed first day of the Trump administration. And again, ridiculous title, I'll read that now. Defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. I'm sorry, I can't even say that with a straight face. It's ridiculous. Referring to people who literally just want to live their lives in peace as extremists. We have a very warped perception of what an extremist is, but regardless, in this executive order, he declared that there are 2 genders recognized by the federal government, and it also states that all federal documentation for identifying people needs to follow what they were assigned at birth. Again, another policy that doesn't make any logical sense, and I'll illustrate this with the story of Hunter Schafer. She is a trans actress who is mainly known from Euphoria, but she's very public about her trans identity. One thing that makes her story especially notable is that she transitioned young, and so she does pass very well as a woman. So I'll play that now.
Hello, internet. I don't really post much these days, but I had a bit of a harsh reality check today and felt like it's important to share with whoever is listening. So my initial reaction to this, because our president, is a lot of talk, was like, I'll believe it when I see it. And today, I saw it on my new passport mail. So now, to specify, my gender markers were first changed in my teens when I first got my driver's license, and then passports following all have been female since then. Hasn't really been a problem. And I guess I'm just sort of scared of the way this stuff like slowly gets implemented. I also want to say I don't give a f that they put an M on my passport. It doesn't change really anything about me or my transness. However, it does make life a little harder. Personally, I haven't tested it out yet. I'll find out next week when I have to travel abroad for the first time with my new passport. But I'm pretty sure it's gonna come along with having to out myself to like Border Patrol agents and that whole gig much more often than I would like to or is really necessary.
And I think, as you can see, it's just kind of ridiculous. And it's having the opposite effect that the Trump administration thinks it's having, right? You're just causing confusion and chaos when this person is just trying to get past airport security. And like Hunter mentioned in her video, you're just putting trans people in unnecessary danger because you're opening them up to harassment and discrimination when they have to disclose, hey, I'm trans, that's why my document says this, and that's why I look so different. What's to say they're not going to be treated differently after that? Because they most likely will. Not just by even the TSA agents, but the people around them who are witnessing this exchange. And it's just a really weird idea that you would need to disclose your medical history to anyone in that moment without wanting to. As if any of these haven't been concerning so far. Next, I want to talk about the SAVE Act, which is a bill that is actually currently going through Congress. I believe it passed in the House and currently waiting Senate approval, but let's hope it doesn't get approved. Basically, what this bill does, on the surface, it claims to verify that people are American citizens when they go to vote at the polls for elections. What the bill actually does is says that you need to have 2 federal documents that match your name. So, for example, your birth certificate must match the name that's on your ID. And at surface level, this doesn't sound too bad, but then you start thinking about all the cases in which somebody may change their name, and it starts to become very, very concerning. So, most importantly, this affects married women the most. Married women who have changed their last name, they no longer have a birth certificate that matches their ID. So, essentially disenfranchising millions of American women. And the only other documentation that would suit this requirement would be a passport, which 50% of Americans don't have. So you'd have to obtain a passport, which does cost a lot of money, and you'd have to keep that passport renewed in order to have the right to vote in the United States. I don't want to fearmonger because it's likely that states would make amendments to this law, and basically they would accept marriage licenses and they would accept proof that the person got married so that they could still vote. But what about more conservative states who are not going to be as lenient with those laws? It's going to be really difficult for those women to vote. A population that's going to be affected by this that we don't talk about as much is trans people. And I think that's on purpose, because I feel like many people are trying to get this bill shut down because people have a lot more empathy for married women. It makes sense, but also trans people are disproportionately affected by this bill because a lot of trans people legally change their name, and so you would no longer have documents that match what your birth certificate says. Again, that one is currently still going through Congress, so I really hope that that one doesn't get passed. That would be a very concerning future for Americans if many, many, many of us were disenfranchised. Next one, thankfully, isn't really a law or a policy that was put into place, but it's just the fact that during the Trump campaign, Republicans spent over $222 million on anti-trans ads. And I'll play one of these ads for you now.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
As you can see, they just use a lot of buzzwords and buzz topics to try and get people scared, to get people to think that trans people are a monolith that's taking over and we're trying to kill you all and ruin your society, which is sad for sure, especially the amount of money. You could split that money up 100 ways, 1,000 ways, and it's going to be life-changing to a person. But instead, we're spending all that money and funneling it into ads that target some of the most vulnerable people in our society. For the general public, I think that probably the most concerning thing that trans people should be looking out for is something called the Trump effect, which is a documented and notable increase in hate crimes under Trump's administration. I don't believe there's been any solid studies that have shown a strong effect of this, the same that it was in his 2016 to 2020 presidency, because again, he's only been president for 100 days or so. So we don't have that data yet, but there's a very marked increase in the amount of hate crimes that occurred during his presidency. There was a study by Feinberg, which, again, every source I have will either be on screen or linked below, and you'll be able to reference that. But this article found that while controlling for many other factors, Trump's presidency is what seems to spark that amount of hate crimes to increase. There's a few reasons why this could be, and I think the main one is just that people feel really emboldened when they know that the government is on their side, for better or for worse, right? If a transphobe knows that they can get away with calling a trans person a slur, then they're going to feel a lot more comfortable doing so, knowing that they're not going to be prosecuted for doing that. Whereas when you have a president that is very anti-discrimination, you understand that the systems that the president puts into place is going to reprimand you when you do such things. But we don't really have that under a Trump presidency. And so we see a lot of concerning groups of people, the KKK, the Charlottesville riots, January 6th. We see a lot of these events where people bond over hate, and they're very outwardly and openly expressing that hate. But they feel comfortable to do that because they know Trump would stand right beside them and join if he didn't have an image to uphold. And even scarier, that's all just part of the anti-trans rhetoric that's being spouted in the media, in politics. There's more that I couldn't even fit into a video, but I think it's just really important to be understanding what's going on and making sure that we're reading things from an unbiased perspective. If we see these executive orders and we see all these laws and bills being pushed through Congress, let's stop and take a second to read what's in these bills. Let's make sure that we're understanding the implications of what will happen if these things are passed. Who all will it affect? Because I think that what's most concerning is that a lot of people in our government right now are the ones not doing that research and not reading the bills before even signing them, and they read a provocative or engaging title to a bill and they just immediately sign it. And obviously that's just speculation on my end, but it's seriously concerning. It makes me worried for what our government could be getting our people into. And again, I'm not trying to fearmonger, but it's actually happening. That kind of wraps up what's happening currently, at least the lowlights. That's the lowlights of what's happening right now. They have successfully turned a lot of neutral people into being transphobic. And not just transphobic, but racist and homophobic and xenophobic, and it's just frightening. Next, I want to talk about the impact that this can have on any minoritized group, but specifically trans people, since that's the topic of this series. I want to bring up the topic of minority stress. There's a really good literature review by Hoy Ellis, which again will be referenced in the description. Basically, what minority stress is the constant stressors that are being faced by minoritized groups because of the fact that they're in those minoritized groups. These are stressors usually that the dominant group is not going to face. And so it's hard for the dominant group to see these stressors because they're not experiencing them. But I'll try to give some examples. Let's take a very broad one. Women walking alone at night. That causes a woman a lot of unnecessary stress that men do not feel to the same extent when they're walking alone at night. That would be an example of minority stress. Or if a black person is applying for 20 jobs and only gets 2 calls back, whereas a white candidate may receive 10 to 15 calls back. It's going to be very stressful for that black person, and so that would be an example of minority stress. Trans people face this a lot, especially with what's going on right now. Everything I just talked about. How could that not cause trans people stress and fear? And what's crazy is that the outcomes of minority stress are physical. A lot of people know that our psychological and physical health is really closely tied together, but it's shown that minority groups have lowered life expectancies because of these types of stresses that are occurring on a daily basis. So even if trans people aren't out getting killed in the street, which they are, even if they weren't, it's that stress takes a toll on your mental health and your body. It's kind of scary that no matter how safe you feel like you are, there could still be factors that are influencing your mental health and physical health that you can't even really quantify or see in any way. I think another really concerning point that a lot of trans people, especially right now, are concerned about is the idea of shifting the Overton window. If you're not sure what that means, that basically just means trying to shift what society deems as extreme into being considered to be normal. So let's say back in 2014, 2015, when things were feeling quite pro-LGBTQ, especially with the fruition of gay marriage laws and such, a lot of these bills that are being proposed nowadays would be looked at with confusion. Like, what are you doing to these people? You can't treat people this way. But when Trump has so consistently spewed the rhetoric that he has, how is that not going to shift what we view as normal, you know? And I guess a good example of this would be the HRT bans that I was talking about earlier. Okay, well, to a lot of people it sounds outrageous that 19-year-olds wouldn't have access to medical care that they need. So after a while of this bill being put into place, who's to say that the age then won't shift to 20, and then 21, and then 22, and 23, and then all adults, right? And if you slowly reach those points incrementally, it doesn't seem extreme anymore. It just seems like it's increasing. It doesn't seem extreme though. And that's what I feel like a lot of people are worried about. It's just that a lot of these laws that are against trans people and other minorities, immigrants included, are a very slippery slope and shows the actual intentions of what the Republican Party's intentions are and what they hope to accomplish, which seems to be a lot more extreme than what they're letting on at the moment. Another impact on people is very obviously the regression in acceptance rates, which I think ultimately harms trans people the most in terms of feeling like you have to hide yourself. I just feel horrible for any trans person right now that's in a situation where they haven't started their transition yet and they now feel like they can't, or that anytime within the next 4 years is not going to be an ideal time to start that transition because they don't know the outcome. They don't know if they're going to be targeted, if they're going to be harassed in public. They don't know that. Choosing to stay in the closet and live with a suppressed identity, again, minority stress, it's causing so much stress and tension within these individuals. That's just another example of something that is going to harm trans people in the long run. And as I've hinted at many times now, the biggest and most permanent impact, of course, would be suicide rates and homicide rates dramatically increasing under the current administration. So I found a really good section of the Human Rights Campaign's website, and it just has a lot of statistics about trans homicides and the prevalence of them. It has a lot of statistics about how they were murdered, usually a lot with firearms. It definitely points out that Black trans women are at the highest risk of being victimized. I'm choosing to reference this source because I thought it was really beautiful how so much of this article was dedicated to sharing so many individual stories. I feel like in these situations we tend to talk about the perpetrators and forget about the victims, but this site puts those pictures front and center, puts their names front and center, and tells their story of what happened to them, how they didn't do anything wrong, and how they were just murdered for being trans in America. That was in 2024. I am worried that those numbers are going to go up in 2025. But let's have hope. That might be hard to do, but let's try to have hope. Aside from the negative impacts that all of these laws and such are having on the trans community, I also do just want to talk about things that are currently prevalent in the experience of being trans that are less negative, but also just weird. I guess some of them may be considered negative in conjunction with other things, but what I mean is, like, for example, the idea of your identity and what you identify as constantly being debated. Very weird, very odd feeling. And it just, I feel like it feels like you're being reduced to a debate topic, which is not how humans should feel. But it's hard not to when there's just so many people arguing about whether or not trans people are valid and whether or not trans people deserve to have rights. I wonder. To sum up the beliefs that quite a lot of people have about transgenderism, I want to play a clip from Jubilee where you could kind of just hear a conservative man talk to a trans woman, and I'll play that now.
So I think I want to start off by asking you what your solution is to, like, the word eradicating. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Well, the word literally means to pull up by the root. So not just to have some half measure where you say, you know, okay, we're only going to trans kids after the age of 9, but not under the age of 9. Okay, we're only going to let men who identify as women go into this bathroom, but not that sports team or whatever. I don't think a half measure makes any sense. In fact, I think a lot of the conservative arguments.
You're not answering my question. What's the solution?
Oh, it
Like,
means
how
to
do you-
uproot it.
So how do you do that? I want to know how you're going to uproot an entire percentage of people.
I'm not uprooting people. I would return American public law to what it was before roughly 2015.
I don't understand the perspective of how you or the Conservative Party is going to make any sort of progress in eradicating an entire percentage. I think it's just
We're not eradicating people. You're trying to say that because it makes us look crazy.
That's what you're saying.
No, I said I want to eradicate a whole ideology of transgenderism.
Trans people. That is going to be people that you are taking.
Like if I want to eradicate poverty, that doesn't mean I want to kill all the poor people.
I'm not saying
quite the opposite,
I'm not saying that you want to kill. I'm asking you what your plan, like what in the best case scenario, how are you going to get people to stop being trans?
I think we're going to tell boys that they're not girls,
so we're
that they're
going to
boys.
tell boys that they're not girls, and they're going to listen.
Yeah, basically.
Really?
Yeah, that's what we've done for most of history.
That happened to me, and I can promise you to God that I didn't listen.
Being trans is an objective phenomenon that can't be debated. And I'm not sure where that doesn't click with people, but the fact that it exists is enough proof that it exists. And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson says this best, so I'm going to play a clip of him really succinctly saying what his thoughts are on this and the whole debate of whether or not biological factors play an important role in the conversation about trans people.
You talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No, wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's a social point, not a scientific point. Meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But it is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So
the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that. although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like, why is it bad or wrong to point out?
I have another way to approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say, it's not biological, it's just it's real and it's there.
Well,
because it's real because it manifests.
I just really like his perspective, and he has a lot of influence in his following and stuff. And so I think that him being so vocal and being willing to take on these interviews where he's talking about these important topics that are just often so thought about illogically, and bring the conversation back down to earth and making people understand that, like, it exists because it exists, and who are you to dictate? And really, you're trying to dictate this, but what's your outcome? What is your final outcome for this population of people who you talk down to so much? Do you want them gone? Do you want them killed? Because that's really the only way that you can conceptualize getting rid of an ideology, which is really just people. I'm not sure really what the outcome is, and I hope it's not anything genocidal, but you never really know. Next is representation in the media. And this is an interesting topic because being a part of a minoritized group, you can tell that media representation is always very calculated. What I mean by that is that the producers of these shows and stuff and movies are choosing to place these characters there because they serve a distinct purpose, whether that's good or bad, right? Minoritized groups are rarely ever given the main roles in a movie unless that person's minoritized identity is a key personality trait in their identity as a character. I'm trying to think of a good example of this. One of them would be Jules from Euphoria. Euphoria is actually a pretty good show in trans representation, but with Jules' character, played by Hunter Schafer, you see that there's just a lot of plot based around the fact that Hunter Schafer and Jules as a character is trans. Whereas you would never really see a Disney movie where the main character is just trans. Period. That's it. That's all. Or like, even if it's not animated, right? You could have any live action film, and it's just very, very rare that you're gonna see a minoritized group have one of the main roles unless they're talking about their minoritized identity. And I do challenge you to try and think of a show or movie in which there's a trans character or a trans actor who's playing a character who being trans is not a main part of their identity. Because I feel like you're going to have a really hard time trying to find that. It's a weird form of tokenism, and if you're not sure exactly what tokenism is, it's kind of like reducing a whole group down to one person. And so, classic example of this would be Obama. So a lot of people have the mindset that, oh, because Obama was president, there's no more racism. So Obama kind of becomes the token black person for all of the white public. And that's kind of what's happening in media representation. It's where, like, you'll see these people on social media as well, not just traditional media, but you'll see these people and they feel like they have to speak for their whole group. And people, that's not how humans work. Everybody's individual. And so it's weird to put a person into that position. I think the implications of this lack of real representation in the media is something that kids, especially kids, notice. Because that's something that always stuck out to me when I was a kid. When one thing I was really struggling with when I came out as gay first was how could being gay possibly be perceived as normal when every single Disney princess movie is a princess being saved by the prince, and never two princes and never two princesses. Like, does that not tell you that same-sex relationships don't exist in a traditional way? That's kind of what I gathered, even as a young child. And so I really struggled with that and accepting myself as normal. Even when there is this representation, it's always in a subcategory. It's never just in the category. So you have romance movies, but then you got LGBTQ romance movies. And like on Netflix, it's its own separate section, and it's like, weird. You're saying so much by not saying anything. Finally, I want to get into the good parts of being trans. I know this video has been packed with terrible things, but I do want to say that despite the constant hate and the constant backlash that the trans community is receiving right now, there have been and always will be beautiful parts of being trans or being a part of any minoritized community. First and foremost is that community. Looking at trans people specifically, I just feel like the rise of online communities is so important and valuable for people in their lives. So many trans people can gather in these spaces to share experiences and advice and feelings, and it's just nice to know that you have a community behind your back who, first of all, understands you a lot more than the average person would, but also they can be there to support you and guide you in these shared experiences. And I think something that stands out specifically for trans people is that there's no guidebook for a transition. As I've mentioned, everybody's transition is going to be different, but one issue that comes along with that is that a lot of people don't know how to transition. And so going into these online communities and learning from the trans people before you, what they did and what was successful for them, or even if it just comes down to something like, I'm experiencing this side effect, have other people experience this? That's something you can find in an online community for trans people. And something specific I've noticed that is so amazing about these online communities for trans people is that they're sort of, this is going to sound really weird, but they're gendered, genderless spaces. And what I mean by that is that since these interactions are all taking place online, you don't really see these people unless you have like some sort of video chat service. But basically what I mean is that behind a keyboard, you can portray your gender in whatever way you want to. And a lot of stress in trans people's lives comes from constantly being misgendered, especially if they don't pass yet. And so, or passing isn't even the goal for some people, but I notice a lot in these communities that you'll see so much support in the form of people using the correct pronouns. The amount of like girl, sister, that type of language is so prevalent, and it's because people understand that that's so affirming to a person's gender. And even if a person's still on the fence about their gender, being able to experiment anonymously in a lot of these online platforms is so incredibly beneficial for figuring out what you like and what you don't like for your identity specifically. I do want to highlight a specific community, and that is called Transgender Zone. It's quite a new service, so I'm not surprised if you haven't heard about it, but I definitely recommend checking it out if you're trans, because think of it like Reddit, but also think of it also like a gated community. Reddit's great, but it can be open to a lot of people who are trying to take advantage of trans people, who are saying things in bad faith. But Transgender Zone, or T-Zone, is kind of gate kept in the best way possible, because anybody can join it, but in order to participate and view and meet other people within the forums on T-Zone, you have to go through an application process where they verify that you're trans. That just adds another layer of comfortability and safety to these online communities, because you know you're not going to have chasers in your DMs, and you know that there's no trolls that are going to be in the comments of your posts trying to say mean things or giving you unsolicited advice that you didn't ask for, or being overly rude or not affirming you, you know? I'm on this, and it is a paid thing, but it's only $5 a month, which is very reasonable. And they include group voice training sessions for trans women. It is just an amazing community to be a part of. And if you're trans and looking for some sort of community, I am not sponsored by T-Zone, I wish I was, but it's just such a good and positive community. And it's pretty much the pinnacle of what online spaces should be for these vulnerable groups in society. I also do want to touch on the concept of chosen family. And although a lot of trans people may be pushed out by their families, even if it's not explicit. You know, I do think that this leaves a lot of room for trans people figuring out and understanding that a lot of the family that you choose to have in your life may be people that aren't biologically related to you. I know I am still in contact with my family, but my parents especially, they're not supportive of who I am. I find a lot of support in the people that are around me, in my friends, and they provide me so much support and love that it would be wrong to not consider them part of my family. I may not share the same DNA with these people, but they're always going to hold an important piece of my life because of the support that they've given me in times when I've needed it. I think a positive of being in any minoritized group is that you have a very direct and potent way of weeding out all the people that you could possibly interact with in your life who are not good for you. And what I mean by that is, and this especially applies like if you're visibly trans, right? If a person's not going to be nice to you off the bat because you're trans, they don't deserve to get to know you, and they're not going to want to get to know you. But that's a good thing. It just immediately weeds out the bad people from your life because you immediately know who cares about you as a person and who doesn't care about you because of how you look. Finally, a very last topic I want to talk about is just having hope for the future. As weird as it may sound, I do think that the extreme moves that the Trump administration is making could have positive effects in a lot of ways, because I feel like it is showing a lot of moderate people who may have voted for Trump but didn't really care that much. They kind of just voted for Trump because they didn't pay attention and they just needed somebody to vote for. I think that these policies that he's putting into place are kind of waking these people up in a sense and showing them that, like, oh, this guy's doing some stuff that's like kind of insane. He's kind of doing stuff that's kind of extreme, kind of crazy, and I don't really agree with that. Let me kind of stand up and say I don't really like this guy anymore and spread the reasons why I shouldn't have voted for him and whatnot. I think that this could build a stronger community of support for trans people, and I think it could build a lot of allies to the trans community because these people understand that the trans community is pretty much under attack by the government at the moment. Not trying to sound dramatic, but I'm not really sure how else you could take it when you look at all these laws and stuff combined. Another important point is that Trump can hopefully only be president for one more term. I do think that he is a really big figurehead for a lot of these hateful ideas. So I do think that when he is out of office in the future, I think that he will take a lot of the chaos and hateful actions with him. I think another thing that's good about these weird policies he's trying to put forth is that they are kind of shedding light on all of the areas and where the gender binary falls apart, which I kind of mentioned as we were talking about them, but it's like, okay, yeah, when trans men start speaking up about their experiences of like feeling like under these laws they'd have to go into the women's bathroom, and then you see these trans men and they literally look 100% cisgender, it's like, what is this law trying to accomplish? It's making the conservative legislation look really stupid because it's clear that the conservative people that are proposing these two different types of legislation are not actually informed in the different communities that they're trying to legislate on. At the end of the day, I think that acceptance for all things ebbs and flows. And unfortunately, we are kind of in a state right now in the United States where acceptance is slow. We're in a very poor state of acceptance. As blunt as it sounds, I think that the most important thing we can do right now is not shut up. When vulnerable groups stop talking and they let the bullies bully, that's when they feel more empowered to push us down even more. I say just keep protesting, keep spreading awareness, keep talking about trans people. And trans people, you keep being authentically yourself in yourself, so that way you don't have to derive it from a society that's really not going to affirm you in the moment. Now more than ever, I really think it's important that we as a trans community stay united in our cause of trying to get awareness out there about the fact that we're just trying to live our authentic lives. And that really does bring my project to a close. And again, I know a lot of the topics that I talked about in this video were quite depressing and concerning, especially if you're a trans person in the United States right now, but I think it's important to have an understanding of the landscape that we're currently facing, and when you don't talk about it, I think that it just gets worse and worse and worse. Again, that was the ultimate goal of this project, is to get people to hopefully understand the experience of what it may be like to be trans. Of course, my story and my experiences that I have shared have just been one of millions, but there are a lot of common threads, and I stayed pretty general in the things that I talked about, and so I feel like a lot of trans people really would resonate with what I say, and I do feel like this project served its purpose if watched in its entirety as it was intended, and I think I covered all the major facets of life for trans people, and I just hope that to anybody watching this, I hope that you learned something. Whether it was the term chaser or whether I maybe shifted a perspective that you hadn't thought about before, those little moments are so impactful for creating change. I'm really grateful that even though I don't have a following, that I was given the opportunity to be at a place where I have the equipment to sit down and make these videos. And even if my videos are only getting out to 70, 100, 150 people, that's 150 people that watched me yap. Right? That's 150 people who have now at least were curious enough to listen to what I had to say, even if they didn't agree. And you know, I got my first hate comments on the gender-affirming medical transition one, which I thought would happen because that's a divisive topic. But believe it or not, I was happy that I got those comments, because in my mind, that kind of just proved the need for my project. I'm sorry, but you really proved my thesis. When you start commenting on my videos, a person who's not hurting you at all, this person, me, is getting 100 views on my video, and you feel the need to take the time out of your day to try and stomp me down. Well, I'm sorry, but you just gave my project more validity, and I hope you know that we're not trying to hurt you. We're not trying to overtake your communities. We're not trying to do anything other than survive and live and thrive, which is getting harder and harder to do, but I hope that someday everybody can understand that just because you don't face issues, that doesn't mean they don't exist. I just want everybody to reassess that the way that they act truly and genuinely impacts other people. Not everybody's at a place in their life where they can just brush off mean comments, but your words and your actions are important. So please just remember that. If you are trans and you watched any of these videos in this series, I hope that you related. I hope that you found community in me. And yeah, get a hold of me if you ever want to talk. I think that about wraps up this video and this project. I may continue making videos in the future. I tend to have a passion for talking about political topics, so we'll see. It's kind of time consuming, and I'm a college student, but we'll see. So I may or may not see you in the future, but bye. Look at this freaking baby. Oh my goodness.